So in order to survive, you lend them the money. And what is the money you lend them? It's the profits you get off of paying them too little, that you then turn around, rather than paying them the wage that would solve the problem, you hold back the wage, they become desperate, you lend them the money, and now you charge them interest for the money you lent them. So in the end, it's cheaper than paying them the wages. The grotesqueness of all of this, and then blaming it on the worker that they should somehow know how to manage their money better. It's an extraordinarily articulated system. And that's why one of the virtues of your book, and that people should understand, is that you try to get across that the problem is we need to escape from capitalism as the system, but that requires us to escape from a system of beliefs, a way of thinking that makes capitalism's irrationality hidden, that makes its undesirability disappear like a magician. You are doing that work. It's always crucial.
Welcome, everybody, to the free podcast. Today is a different situation in which we are talking about the book I wrote, Escape from Capitalism, that is coming out just now with Simon & Schuster. And for this reason, I was lucky enough to call Richard Wolff, who is, of course, someone who does not need an introduction. He's been our main and most important supporter, someone who has an incredible legacy and an incredible knowledge as a Marxian economist who is deeply rooted into Praxis. And Rick has a book called Defining Capitalism that was integral part of my studies, and what is also part of the conversation within the book Escape from Capitalism that I wrote. So we are here together to have a conversation, and we are kind of flipping the script in the sense that Rick will start asking me questions rather than the other way around. And let's get into it and have a conversation about escaping capitalism for half an hour.
Good. Let me begin by saying I have learned a lot by reading the book, the advanced copy that you kindly had sent to me. And it led me to think over and over again that I would love to ask you the following question. As you try to make sense, as we are all trying, of what the Trump administration represents, because clearly he's doing different things than previous presidents have dared to do, is the appropriate way to understand him that he's desperately trying to save capitalism? And is he doing that? Or is he actually making the problems of American capitalism even worse than they were? Or maybe the answer to my question, and this is another question, is that he's doing both of these things at the same time. You're a student of capitalism's tenuous grasp on all of us. So how do you see the Trump phenomena in that framework?
Thanks, Rick. I think in answering this question, we can figure out why a critical political economy analysis can actually be really empowering for people who never thought economics could be anything they ever cared about. Because as citizens of this world, we need to be capable of understanding the fundamentals of how our capitalist economy works. And the thing that Trump does, I think, is bring to the extreme a lot of tendencies and realities that are of capitalism, and in this way make it more visible to us. And in this sense, this is not necessarily good for our capitalist system because our capitalist system does operate and has operated through consensus building. And consensus, right, this is the whole point when Gramsci talks about hegemony. Hegemony is really when you are able to rule a class-based society, which is an oppressive society, not just by coercion, but by consensus. And the consensus under capitalism is inbuilt on the very nature of the economy, because the nature of our economy is one that leads to easily forgetting about the exploitative foundation of the way in which goods are produced and wealth is accumulated. So this is really important, is that in our capitalist economy, the political order is invisibilized by the very fact that we are supposedly all politically free, right? We're all American citizens, supposedly, and thus have all equal rights in front of the law. Now, we know that this is clearly a gross abstraction, but the point is that we have taught ourselves that liberal democracies are based on equality in front of the law, and don't realize that this equality in front of the law hides what is most important, which is a very deep economic inequality between those who have no choice but to go work for a wage and those who have the capacity to command investment and production. So this invisible coercion, this deep unfreedom that our system is so capable of hiding, is something that is true of our economy. And I think Trump is doing us a favor in highlighting how actually this supposed freedom is indeed based on deep unfreedom, not just on exploitation of the American workers, but on structural plunder and extraction of resources and value from the south of the globe, and more generally from the earth and all of our resources that are captured by capital accumulation. So in this sense, I think Trump is doing us a good favor in exposing the violence that is real in our system, yet often hidden.
Yeah, I was struck in that regard when I learned that on Friday, the 16th of January, the Central Labor Council, AFL-CIO, of Minneapolis, Minnesota, did something I did not think I would see in my lifetime. They voted to endorse a general strike in the city of Minneapolis and around there. The Central Labor Council represents 80,000 workers in Minneapolis, union workers, that they would endorse a general strike. And the general strike is targeted against ICE, against Mr. Trump as the leader and commander of this military assault on an American city. These are signs you would never have that if the issue were this or that policy. This is the reflection of an accumulation of grievances that have had no way to be expressed. And so now they come out in this remarkable commitment designated for the 23rd of this month. That's the end of this week, Friday of this week, is remarkable. Seems to me remarkable sign that Mr. Trump has, whatever he thinks he's doing, he has brought contradictions to a head inside American capitalism that most of us did not think were anywhere near this level of development.
Completely. And he has exposed again how the capitalist state never operates for the good of the whole. And when, we talk about the state operating in terms of the general interest, this general interest is the interest of capital accumulation, which by definition means following the logic of profit. And this has nothing to do with the actual real needs of people. So I think Trump is really exposing again how our system is very much based on state violence, and this violence is structural, and he's just bringing it to a very accelerated and extreme level. But even his economic policies, apart from the fact that he is, using clearly law and order to a degrees that we've never seen, not to mention the military-industrial complex and the imperialist attacks. The point here is that also his economic policies are shedding light on the bullshit that the liberal mainstream has fed us for all this time, right? I mean, Trump is not doing differently from Biden and previous Democrats in doing full-blown austerity. He's just doing it more explicitly and showing us all the truth that was always there, that austerity policies, as I tried to explain in Escape from Capitalism, are always about impoverishing, encasing the unfreedom and the coercion of the majority and protecting and incentivizing the minority. So it's a constant shift of resources. Not only people produce more value than what they get paid for and thus are like trapped in exploitation. People are trapped in exploitation because the public policies allow this to happen even more so by constantly taking away all those basic resources that they pay with their own taxes, right? So what we see today is that austerity is not about paying back the debt. The debt is going up, yet there is the structural dismantlement of social services in favor of paying the military bills. Trump now tells us that we're going to go to a trillion, over a trillion in 2027. This has never happened in the history of any country. And of course, the United States is the one with the biggest military apparatus ever. So we see like the money is being used, our money is being used, but it's being used for purposes that are clearly not about social redistribution. And in the same side, of course, taxation is extremely regressive with Donald Trump allowing enormous tax breaks. I was mentioning in 2027 alone, those making over $1 million will get 114 billion in tax breaks in just 1 year, while the majority will continue to pay disproportionate taxes. So this is the point here, I think, is that if we analyze how Trump is just the biggest exponent of austerity policies, and we realize, though, that these austerity policies are something that need to be defeated, you won't just defeat, if you defeat Trump, you will not defeat the structural austerity design of our economic system. Right now, what we need to see is this general strike that you were mentioning, actually being more courageous and not limiting itself to say, we want to kick out the bad Republicans for government, because the reality is that economic coercion is necessary for our economic system. And this is why we need to rethink it.
You know, I'm struck, if I could ask you about the tangential question, the imagery of the Venezuelan act. You know, Venezuela, as most Americans have some idea, has a lot of oil, okay? For decades, for a couple of centuries, that oil, when it was found and exploited, made a very small number of people very rich. And it was handled by oil companies that sent their profits to the handful of major shareholders, the way capitalism always does. And what the Trump administration just did was overturn a government that represented, maybe didn't do a good job, that's another matter, but tried to represent, let's take the oil that's in our country and use it for the benefit of our country, not an oil company, most of whose people and beneficiaries are overseas. And what the United States just did is take the oil away from Mr. Maduro and Mr. Chavez and give it back to the same oil companies that did that all before for a century. It's an astonishing attempt to go backwards in history that ought to be understood in the light of the actual history of that country and of this kind of colonialism over and over again.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, it just shows how capitalism feeds off of imperialism and colonialism, and you can't understand one without the other. and this is being made very, very, very clear. In the book, I have a chapter called "The West Over the Rest," in which I try to go back to theories that you and I are lucky to have studied, but I think are really missing in the public conversation, which is the point about dependency and showing how the accumulation of the global north and the fact that the global elite does live in the global north. And again, not all clearly, this is just a very small minority, less than 1% of Americans. This wealth comes from the structural underdevelopment of the global south. Latin America, Africa, Middle East, and so forth. So this is the whole point of saying, it's again not just the bad Trump kicking out Maduro and doing something that clearly completely destroys any sense of international law and liberal order. This liberal order was already hiding this power of those who are the strongest, the might, right? The might is the right, and this is true of the very history of capitalism and the very reason why we've seen this supposed development and progress in the United States was always based on this underdevelopment of the global south. In the book, I actually spend time on the case of Palestine and the relation between Palestine and Israel because of how it encapsulates in this very, very, very strong and obvious way this global relation between the countries in the global south and the country in the global north. So that Palestine's economies was meant to feed and bolster the Israelis' economy, and this through structural ways in which labor was coming in cheaply from Palestine after Palestinians were impeded to access their own means of subsistence, in the way in which commerce works, trade works, in the way in which all of the resources are funneled out, and the Palestinian territories have no capacity, no autonomy to operate independently. And of course, now with the current never-ending genocide, even after the so-called ceasefire, this is a reality that increases because now it's also about debt dependence. And debt dependence is, again, another form of dependence by which our countries thrive. The data shows very clearly that there's much more money flowing out of the global south through paying back the interest on debt and through value extraction than the money that supposedly we give through our humanitarian aid and supposed reparations for colonization.
Well, the beauty of capitalism always was you don't pay the workers enough for their labor, so in order to survive, you lend them the money. And what is the money you lend them? It's the profits you get off of paying them too little that you then turn around, rather than paying them the wage that would solve the problem, you hold back the wage. They become desperate, you lend them the money, and now you charge them interest for the money you lent them. So in the end, it's cheaper than paying them the wages. The grotesqueness of all of this, and then blaming it on the worker that they should somehow know how to manage their money better. It's an extraordinarily articulated system. And that's why one of the virtues of your book, and that people should understand, is that you try to get across that the problem is we need to escape from capitalism as the system, but that requires us to escape from a system of beliefs, a way of thinking that makes capitalism's irrationality hidden, that makes its undesirability disappear like a magician. You are doing that work. It's always crucial. Slavery disappeared because slaves finally figured out that they had to get at the problem of the concept of slavery, that there was no need for it, that the pain you feel is the same I feel, whether I'm a master or a slave. And that's what you're doing. And I think, because I know you're a professor of economics like I am, part of your work is constantly teaching people how to think critically about the concepts that have been made to be normal or natural or otherwise routine, because they are a prison that we have to break out of.
Exactly. And as you point out, there couldn't be any humane slavery. And this is why it's also the case you can't have any humane capitalism.
Right.
And this is where I think the strength right now of the potential transformation lies. A lot of people don't want to participate, are disillusioned because they don't believe the wishy-washy explanations of the problems that the liberal media proposes. Again, that is based on the same approach to knowledge that is typical of academia, especially economics, which is this methodological individualism, right? Blame it all on this bad apple, this rotten apple, this evil guy. This is the way to keep us blind from, again, the broader architecture. And in the book, I really say we are the architects of this economy. We can thus dismantle it, but we're also trapped in this architecture. And this is very important because then this means that it's the workers who are trapped, but in a way also, the big capitalist corporations are trapped. Like the reason why you have to constantly increase the rate of exploitation is not a choice. And this is important because I think when my first book came out, The Capital Order, the way the Guardian liked to propose the theories I had was like, oh, austerity is a political choice. And this, you see, does two things. One, correctly tries to demystify the idea that austerity is some objective, neutral toolkit to, just manage our economy. And this is important because we're trying to say that actually economic ideas justify economic policies that are all about power and oppression. And this is important. But on the other hand, this reading makes it sound like austerity is optional for capitalism, right? Oh, it's a political choice. So you could do it or not do it.
Right.
And it's really only the bad guys, the rotten apples, who actually end up doing it. So we can kind of have this humane capitalism if we are, democratic enough in the way, like liberal enough. And this is, I think, the whole point of why I wanted to really make this intervention, is to explain better something that could have been maybe otherwise misunderstood, which is no, austerity is a political choice, but it's not an option. This political choice does not mean it's optional. It means that our economic system is a political choice because we've built it. But at the same time, in order to be preserved, austerity is crucial because you need to keep people disempowered. If people were able to access resources, were able to find the time to organize and to think collectively, they wouldn't be watching while we finance a genocide and we have increasing number of homelessness of people who freeze to death in the street in American cities in January. So this is the whole point, is to say that our system is political, but it's also really constraining what we can do. And thus we can't just judge the individual. We need to understand the individual as being stuck in a mechanism that it's the one we really need to try to challenge. And this is, I think, refreshing because otherwise we're stuck in this permanent trap that ultimately naturalizes capitalism. So Rick, I think in terms of what I learned from you is exactly this, is that, you've done, and I was saying on your show, and I say it again, I've been reading Rick's biography more in detail, and this has been so really inspiring to me because you've really made the history. You were in the 60s, the 70s, active, doing real work of organizing on the ground while learning at the Ivy League's mainstream economics and then finding ways to teach it in a more critical way. But what we know is that the reason why there is this lack of imagination in terms of what to do is also due, and not only, of course, is also due to the way knowledge circulates. And we need, as economists, to take responsibility because the way economics is taught at school is there mainly to disempower people. So what I tried to do in this book is to say, how can we deliver a book that is accessible, readable to people to see that actually they need to understand how the economy works because the way they normally have internalized how they think about it is structurally disempowering. It kills their momentum to act. And instead, we need an economics that is courageous. But as you teach us, you can only be courageous in doing economics if you do participate in social struggles. And that's why I was also moved by your inspiration to You have Democracy at Work, which I hope all of our listeners, I'm sure all our listeners are already subscribed to. If not, please subscribe. But the point is that what we try to do here at the Free Forum is really a space to say, people, let's organize, let's find solutions. And with the thoughts and analysis that we can provide, the two things hopefully can lead us in a different direction.
I'm struck again. Years ago when I was starting out, I had to fight and learn just as you have had to learn. My teachers used to tell me that the war in Vietnam was a choice. These were the liberals who wanted to be critical of the war and be critical by saying it's just a choice. And it took me years to figure out, yeah, but the interesting question is, why did you make that choice? What were the pressures that produced that choice? Of course you have options, but you didn't choose those. You chose this. You went to war and did a destruction that Vietnam is still struggling out from under. You killed, hundreds of thousands of people, some quickly, some slowly. You distorted the whole development of that part of the world. What will you do? Of course it was a choice, but that's not interesting. What's interesting is what made you do that choice. Mr. Trump is choosing to send a private army into Minneapolis. Yes, that's a choice, but it's the capitalism of America that has brought the president to the point where this is a rational for him, and as you well point out, not rational for anybody. The people of America are paying the taxes to fund an army attacking the people of America. Something's wrong in that story.
Yes, and I think we need to take responsibility as, we are all situated. We were lucky to, study, get a PhD. We need to take responsibility for actually what economists do. And I think this is a common frustration, and we bonded on this before, is that, you have the mainstream folks who teach utter nonsense to keep everyone dumb, right? The idea that actually we're individuals maximizing our utilities, that we live in this perfect competitive world that is actually increasing everyone's opportunities. All of that is clearly complete nonsense that everyone realizes at the end of the day. But then we have our fellow supposed critical economists, even supposedly Marxian scholars, who enjoy their privileged capacity to just look at the world from a distance, theorize about it, and just watch. And I think this is something that I actually wanted to ask you, because you were with so many scholars in the 60s and 70s that really shaped the Marxian tradition. But I do believe that you also thought that these scholars, including someone like Baran, someone like Sweezy, even maybe someone like Althusser, who you've met and worked with, was there this sense that even these big names that inspire so many of us and have read them and learned, they were still in their own selves, in their own personality, kind of still bourgeois and being detached from the actual struggles? So there was still some bourgeois attitude ingrained in their own existence. Can we say that was true even for these big names that you were actually learning from and working with in the 70s?
Yes, you can, and I think you should. I think it's a tragedy. I think it diminished the contribution they made. I learned enormously from Sweezy, from Magdor, from Baran, who were personal teachers of mine for years. So I don't want to in any way dismiss all that they contributed and all that they did. But you are right. They didn't have the day-to-day organizational involvement with people on the ground, struggling in the working class for something better. And that hurt them. And it was one of the ways that the anti-communist craziness of America after World War II, the Cold War, which stunted the development of intellectual life in this country. By the way, not just for leftists, for everybody. It made it a desert, an intellectual barren desert in this country, which I say after a lifetime of Harvard and Yale and Stanford and all the others, which were above all else intellectually boring for many of us, leftists, rightists, and so on. But here's the difference with Althusser. When I went and worked with him, I was already aware of that point you're making. And I talked about it with him. And I said, your work is in some ways more abstract than Sweezy, Baran, or the others. And yet here I am, an activist, sitting here in your office at the École Normale, the university in the middle of Paris. And he said, yes, because I have my feet on the ground. And I said, that's what I want to talk to you about. How do you have that? And his answer was, I'm a member of the Communist Party. And as a member of the Communist Party, I am a member here in the 5th district, the arrondissement, it's called in Paris. And I go to the meetings. And I sit with a baker, and I sit with a factory worker, and I sit with a school teacher, and I have my chance to talk about my problems in the university, but I have to listen to them talk about, and then I see examples I can use in my teaching. I learn about mechanisms of capitalism I hadn't even been aware of. And slowly it dawns on me that they who appreciate learning from me, that I have to appreciate. He was very warm and telling me advice which I followed. Don't ever give up your activism, because it will teach you as much or more than what you get in the academic. It wasn't an argument not to do academic work. He was the one who made me go back and read Hegel, which is about as hard as it gets to do this kind of work. But the same intensity that said read Hegel said be active in the struggle, no matter where it is.
And I think this is especially the case when one needs to think about alternatives. And as Hegel would tell us, you can't think about alternatives in being situated within capitalism in the abstract, right? Because that's, again, you fall into modern bourgeois ideology. You need to be able to build different social relations in order to even start imagining these alternatives.
Right.
And this, I think, is really, really important as to why then there's such a lack of interesting scholarship about alternatives, is because these alternatives can't just be, this was the critique Marx had of Proudhon at the end of the day. We're not discovering anything new. But the point is that you can't think about alternatives as sitting in the armchair and within a capitalist system, because you end up universalizing capitalist values and you end up universalizing capitalist institutions without realizing it. So the only way to actually think about alternatives is to get your hands dirty, to try it out. And it's difficult. I mean, here in Tulsa, luckily I'm surrounded by wonderful, really generous human beings, and we're working on this collectively, but it's rough, like the sense of disorganization. Yeah. People, of course, this is what austerity does. People have to survive. So people have to work really hard jobs and have very little time. And when they do have time, they might think that they need to prevail over others, because we are meant to think that if we don't fight, we're not good enough. So there's all this reality, this personal reality of just humanity that is not separate from theory. It's actually what social organization for alternatives needs to be able to understand and look like. And I really do believe that those scholars who were able to give some understanding of the alternatives were engaged, starting from Marx, Gramsci, so many scholars that were doing the work on the ground. And unfortunately, I think we need to teach, hopefully, the new generations that will make up academia. Now, academia will be a different game. We know that tenure is probably going to be something that will be something of the past very soon. So we'll see. Maybe more precarious. What I've seen is that more precarious scholars and teachers oftentimes then end up being more real in terms of organizing. Yeah. But the point is, we do need, I think, to try to convey that this is not less scholarly because it is connected with praxis. It's actually the best scholarship you can get out of this. Yeah.
The best teachers are the ones who stop trying to impress everybody with how clever they are and realize that the job is to take complex things and begin to make them accessible to people, they'll develop their own complexity. What they need from you is to help get them underway. My best teachers were always the activists who had been disappointed and needed to become revolutionary so that they could continue their activism. You have to have the big image in order to survive the disappointments of struggling for the little one, just as much as the other way around. You have to win a few local in order to hold on to your. That's the genius. Rosa Luxemburg, whose death happened a few days ago in 1919. It's a lesson of the intertwinement of theory and practice that you have to learn again and again because it is so wrenched apart in a capitalist system. I do have to go. I want to thank you for doing this interview with me. I want to thank you for writing your book, particularly. The more of these books we all collectively produce and distribute, the bigger the audience and the greater the reach these ideas will have.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rick. And we will have you on to discuss your biography once it is out. And we also are always proud of collaborating with Democracy at Work and Economic Update. That is Rick's show that comes out once a week. And I hope you can follow that. Thank you again. Have a wonderful day. And we speak soon. Thank you.
Bye-bye.